And so welcome to our panel discussion on the ethical implications of generative AI. My name is Leslie Diaz. Today, we are delighted to bring together 4 PhD students from diverse academic backgrounds to explore the multifaceted dimension of this topic. Generative AI, including technologies such as language models and creative algorithms, has rapidly transformed various aspects of society, from art to entertainment to law and governance. But this comes with significant ethical considerations that warrant careful examination and interdisciplinary collaboration. And our panelists bring expertise from fields ranging from mathematics and law to computer scientists and design, providing a rich tapestry of perspectives on the ethical challenges and opportunities that these technologies bring or could potentially bring. So together we'll be delving into legal implications, ethics in AI arts, interpretability of transformer models and standards, and much more. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Natalia Menendez. She is a candidate at the European University Institute, where she researches the proportionality within the use of facial recognition technology. She has also worked on the philosophical and legal implications of the use of large language models, especially privacy and data protection. She is a teaching assistant at the School of Transnational Governance, a research fellow at the Information Society Law Center at the University of Milano, a co-founder of the Digicon blog, a visiting researcher at the Biometrics Law Lab of the Center for IT and IP Law at the KU Leuven Faculty of Law and Criminology, and a former vice chair of the PhD student group in AI ethics. Then we have Atif Supriyabankul. He is a computer scientist and anthropologist by training. He is pursuing a PhD on the mapping of accountability requirements for automating decision-making systems and the technical capabilities of machine learning operations. He is interested in software engineering and standards for AI systems and how it can help facilitate the interaction between the technical layer and the ethical and legal layers for accountability in AI. He's also a member of the Knowledge and Data Engineering Group at Trinity College and a member of the Digital Governance Strand of ADAPT, a part of the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for AI-driven digital content technology. Third, we have Michael Ivanitsky. He is a PhD candidate in applied mathematics with a research focus on mechanistic interpretability techniques, especially for improving the safety of transformer-based AI systems. His goal is to help understand whether GPT systems can plan, how this planning occurs, and how we can better align the goals of these systems with those of humans. He has further interest in symmetries in lost landscapes of neural networks and their applications in understanding their internals. And he has worked on projects in game theory, computational neuroscience, and computer vision. And last but not least, Petra Jeskelainen. She is a PhD candidate and a critical design researcher at the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences at the Royal Institute of Technology. She focuses on sustainability of creative AI arts and AI arts with a background in human-computer interaction and design for change. Her research work includes more than human and feminist environmental post-humanities inquiry of AI arts, and her core research interest lies in critically examining the ethical underpinnings of AI art technologies and diversifying the values engaged in constructing their technological material cultural futures. She is a part of the Creative Media Technology team and is also involved with the Sustainability and Sustainable Futures Lab. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating in today's panel. So I would like to start with a first general question that you're all invited to answer, and it's just to break the ice. So how do you perceive the overall ethical landscape of generative AI, and what are some of the most pressing ethical concerns that arise from its development and deployment from your own background perspective? And let's start with Petra.
So I think we have a lot of things that have not been investigated at this point of time. There's the environmental sustainability aspect. Related to sustainability, there is also like values and cultures, how they are supporting sustainability when it comes to generative AI. And then we have cultural political questions and design political questions, which I'm quite interested in. And for example, that generative AI technologies, they are sort of like enforcing certain types of values and worldviews. So I think we need to address those sort of like cultural political questions so they don't become a tool of colonization of certain cultures, which is often is like Euro-Western cultures. And also like China is developing those technologies. So I think in the current landscape, those countries are and cultures are dominating the existing tools. So I think we need to critically look into that and environmental aspects of like non-human, humans, how do we value different things and beings.
Okay, thank you. Natalia, what do you think on this question?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you, Leslie, for organizing the panel and also for inviting me. And obviously, considering my own bias and my background, I would say for me, one of the most pressing issues are the ones related with privacy and data protection. We have heard, for example, not very long time ago, about data breaches. I think ChatGPT, they reported a data breach, I think it was last year, where many sensitive information, also credit card numbers and other kinds of information, maybe not that personal, but still important information, I would say, was leaked. But also in general, as I'm sure most of you knows, the cases drawn by the data protection authorities all over Europe against ChatGPT, but also other, for example, other chatbot models like Replica regarding questions such as the interaction of minors with chatbots. Also the privacy and data protection considerations in general of the collection and processing of data, personal data, but those systems. Also, very, very worrisome, I would say. It was the case also last year, I think, of the suicide of a Belgian man after having a conversation with a chatbot. So I would say questions, fundamental rights or human rights questions more broadly are kind of worrisome in this regard. And lastly, I would point out our multimodal systems in the case that precisely this morning, I think I read on Twitter that Gemini had disabled the generating image feature. Some people pointed out, and I discussed this with colleagues of mine, that behind this decision might be the thing that there might be images that might allow the re-identification of people. And I think in general with multimodal systems, I'm talking here especially about image generating systems, there's a high risk of, for example, people uploading pictures of their relatives because they want, I don't know, I will upload a picture of my mother and say, portray her as a fairy or something like that. But what I'm actually giving is actually to those systems a big amount of personal data, more specifically biometric data. So I would say multimodal systems should be something we should be taking a closer look in the near future.
Thank you. So I think after you have something also a take on this question from your own perspective, and you have worked a bit with, or you're interested in the labeling systems. You mentioned a few days ago that I think Meta is implementing this labeling system to provide more accountability to the implementation of generative AI. So, what is your take on this question about the general ethical landscape?
Yeah, I mean, for that announcement from Meta, I think it's actually really interesting in a way that the industry like as a whole, I think like okay, at least for like media industry, right? If we consider that Meta is actually like generating actually a lot of their revenue from advertisement, right? So at least in that industry, they realize that like each of the platform or provider, right, cannot tackle this like issue alone, right? Of the issues. So the issues that like we discuss is actually the issues of the images, right, that got generated from these like AI tools, right? And they are actually now widespread and now like on this like social media platform, right, and also other platform as well, to the point that like it's now more and more difficult for people to distinguish, right, whether the photos that they found in the news report, it's true, it's a genuine photo or real photo or not, right, or whether the photos in the for example in the product reviews, right, in those like e-commerce website is actually real or not, right, or those like shorts, right, or video, right, or whether it's on TikTok on or Reels or YouTube shorts, it's actually like true or not, right, because this is all like for example like the latest Google model, right, can also generate short video as well, right? So I think like one of the things that they try to come up with, it's a kind of metadata, right, or some label, right, that the industry agreed that okay, let's come up with some standard way to label this, because we all know that if each of us, right, tackle the like use a different approach for labeling or put the data in, right, and other platform cannot read it, cannot understand it, it will cause it will it will kind of a silo approach, right, and in order to actually tackle this, like everybody actually have to like working together. So basically they're now talking about those like standards, how to actually exchange the information about whether the images is actually generated or not, that can work together like across platforms.
Yeah, so you're mentioning the point of interdisciplinary work between, for example, policymakers and computer scientists. And this, I think this is very important in the essence of this panel, is to try to connect those perspectives. So you talk about trust, and you talk about the problem of misinformation coming from the fact that we don't know if these images or these videos are fake or not, and this can come with a lot of problems. So Michael, so you are kind of the end point of like our social sciences, law, and then computer science and engineering. What is your take on this question of the ethical landscape?
I definitely agree, I think, with most of the concerns previously stated. One of the concerns that I have that I think is a little bit underrepresented in this discussion is the problem of current AI systems and also future generative AI systems becoming more effective generally at influencing human opinions. So I think synthetic images are part of this, and discussing how are we going to like watermark synthetic images so that we can ensure their provenance is a very important part of this discussion. But one of the things that I'm most concerned about is language models being used either for advertisements or for propaganda, and essentially just becoming more and more adept at influencing humans to make decisions that they wouldn't have made otherwise. I think we all remember like the Blake Lemoine incident, where a Google employee was through chatting with an AI system, became convinced that it was sentient or whatever, and wanted like him to buy a lawyer for it. And this was an AI system that was not actually trained to convince him of anything. It was just sort of this chatbot that Google built internally. I think we are already seeing with systems like Replica and these other like companion chatbots, and we'll continue to see systems being built that are specifically aimed at either, convincing humans to use some product or service, or convincing humans of some political opinion or enforcing censorship. And I think this is really not talked about enough, and I think it's going to be a problem in the short term. So that's probably one of my biggest concerns, and I don't know how to handle it. I also think just like the general economic effects from generative AI systems displacing workers in a wide variety of contexts is going to be quite challenging and difficult to deal with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So the implications in political systems and in democracies this year is going to be very interesting for lots of countries around the world. The US, the European Parliament has elections, and we definitely will be seeing the impacts of generative AI this year for the first time in full blown. So I would like to start with this point of the Petra made at the beginning of sustainability. So we have seen the deployment of large language models and image generation in our generation it's been a year more or less, and lots of reports have come about on the amount of resources these models use, and brings the question whether or not we should be at all using them. So I would like to ask Petra to so what is your take, or like what would be your opinion on the sustainability aspect? How can we mitigate this particular aspect from your take, from your background perspective?
That's very challenging. So as like what you mentioned, that should we stop using them? A lot of people in HCI and sustainability research think that we should, and we should go towards like reduction. A reason for that is that there is like a paradigm where people sort of think that when we develop AI, then we can make it more efficient, more energy efficient, and then that will solve the problems, you know, and then we are able to use and adapt it to different domains in the society. That is sort of like enabling transformation in the socio-technical fabric of the society. And as a result, it might be that it spreads into more fields, and then the environmental impact is just higher and higher. So like what I think is that we cannot solve the problem solely by creating more energy efficient technology. I think that is a problem. It's a misconception to think so. And then we need to reflect on how much we are using those technologies. And then another problem also is that it's very hard for us to measure the environmental impact because the landscape is changing all the time. So last year there was one study coming out where people looked into environmental impact of visual generative AI. So they looked into a few different systems, Midjourney and DALL-E, and I think there was a third one as well. But even in that paper, what is being said is that it's so difficult to access the information because companies are not transparent about different aspects of the model, but also it's hard to find information about the real use, that how much people are using those systems. So then when those are being measured, it's like we can have some kind of estimate, but it might be, you know, changing in a few months, and then also it might not reflect on the real state of things. So that is one reason why, for example, in my own research, I started looking more into values rather than this kind of like quantification and measuring of the environmental impact, and then thinking about how can we cultivate values that are sustainable, for example, in our relation to environment, in our relation to non-humans. And a lot of those problems are sort of like rooted in our relation, in our culture, in our relation to the world. So for example, if we use human-centered approaches, when we are designing the AI technology, we might be deprioritizing sort of the non-humans and the environment. So I'm working a lot with those things and trying to also see what kind of value stances and what kind of cultural dispositions developers and designers of the technology have.
Okay, so I think it's important point that you make, that energy efficiency has become the panacea of the solutions or the methods to fix the problem of or the topic of AI sustainability. But it's not only that, and when we think about in general how we consume not only AI systems but in general consume resources, this whole idea of degrowth, of deconsumption, should be maybe one of the things we should talk about. And in that, I mean, think that the problem is definitely something we should, as consumers, think about, but also what are our institutions and our regulations doing to promote things? And in that respect, I would like to hear Natalia's opinion on how can the regulations and like the law or the policies help in this endeavor?
Well, I think the Artificial Intelligence Act, the European Union legislative proposal, actually, I have not seen the last final version because it has not, like an official version has not been published, although the legislative process, I mean, we already have an agreement on the text, but I would say if you take a look at the different stages of the text, so from the first proposal, for example, I would say there was hardly any environmental provisions. I would say if you see the different the Council position, then the Parliament, the European Parliament negotiating positions, you could see a tendency going more and more towards to consider in this aspect. So, for example, the negotiating position from the European Parliament contained some things and was, I would say, more attentive to the environmental dimension. I would say the last final text, as I said, I have not seen it yet, so I couldn't conduct a thorough analysis, but I'm kind of hopeful. And particularly, I think seeing this positive evolution that the regulators had, I would say, are aware of the problem and are aware of the situation, and whether it comes from academia or activists or stakeholders involved, they have heard the people claiming for more and more considerations on this aspect, and I'm quite hopeful about this. So I think regulation can help, but let's see also when it's in practice to what extent it actually helps. But I think we are on the right track.
Okay. So in that, like connecting to the aspect of sustainability, I think the aspect of accountability is very close together. And I don't know, it seems to you the same, but conceptualizing these ideas is very difficult. The social scientists sometimes have one idea of when accountability means. The law has another point, and accountability at the end has to do with who answers to the consequences of the actions or the consequence of an deployment of a generative model or a model in general. So in taking from this, I would like to hear from you, Michael. You have been working on mechanistic interpretability for accountability. So could you please elaborate a bit on what you have been doing in your research on this mechanistic interpretability, and what implications does it have for accountability in AI?
So I guess like one of the common misconceptions about how AI systems work is that they are programmed in any meaningful sense, that someone is sitting there like writing code and like writing instructions for exactly how this model should behave under like various circumstances, and placing rules and limitations on it. And I think the misconception there is that we actually understand how these models work internally, and that we have the capability to place restrictions on their behavior from a technical standpoint. So, from like a policy standpoint, we can restrict in what context language models can be used. But if we want to say like we can use some kind of AI system in this context, but it needs to be constrained in some certain way, we don't have the technical capability to do that. So interpretability broadly as like a subset of general sort of alignment research is essentially attempting to deconstruct what models are doing internally. My background was originally in computational neuroscience, which is, trying to use computational and mathematical techniques to understand what one intelligent system, the human brain or other brains, are doing. And so it was sort of a natural transition to me to move to interpretability, which is taking this maybe kind of intelligent system and attempting to decipher what it's doing on the inside. So specifically, one of my areas of interest is understanding how language models learn constraints from the data that they're trained on. So on a very primitive level, this might mean the constraint of the grammars of whatever languages the language model has learned. and in a in a more maybe safety relevant, policy relevant way. It's learning constraints on their behavior in terms of what sort of outputs can they produce, what sort of requests will they accept or refuse, and so on. Because currently our techniques for attempting to align language models in this way have a lot of promise. ChatGPT will often, when you ask it something harmful, will refuse the request, but it will also often fail to refuse some kind of harmful request. And we want to, I think it is useful to have better capabilities of understanding how these models learn constraints, how we can place constraints on them, or be able to say, it's not going to be possible to constrain an AI system in some certain way. Like, we shouldn't use this system in this context because constraining it is not possible. So that's broadly what my research is. I don't know if I should follow up to that with sort of more on how it's related to accountability.
Yes, so I want to ask you a follow-up question. So this is very interesting. Especially, I really appreciate your candidness on telling us that this is a misconception, that we think that you as a computer scientist can really look into the model and really understand what's happening. And this is maybe how we perceive it, the non-expert, not technical expert people. And when you applied, for example, the mechanistic interpretability methods, what are the possibilities for accountability? Is it something we could translate, or interpretability in terms of translation and not necessarily in terms of profound understanding of the model? Maybe we should change a bit on this.
I think one of the main sort of long-term goals of interpretability research is to provide for any sort of decision that a language model makes or any kind of AI system makes, to provide an explanation of why it made those decisions, what pieces of its training data were used to make some prediction or some decision, or what sort of information from the prompt, from the context, was used to make a decision. So in my opinion, this would probably be useful for accountability. But I think this goes back, we sort of can't solve with mechanistic interpretability the problem of who is legally responsible for the actions of a language model, because at least as I understand it under our current frameworks, the language model itself can't be responsible. It cannot be punished in any meaningful way. You can't send it to jail, you can't fine it, right? So I don't think this actually helps us very much with sort of the legal issue of who's going to hold corporations accountable for the language models that they build and for the actions that these language models take. So it doesn't help us with that, but hopefully in contexts where, we're deploying language models or other AI systems in some kind of context where we care about its decision-making, we can help make its decision-making safer, I guess. Maybe that would be my response, is it doesn't solve the problem of accountability. But hopefully if we do decide to deploy it and we do decide how accountability is going to be, spread out, maybe spread out is not the right word, how it's going to be assigned, then language models can help us actually ensure that these systems are safe when we do decide to deploy them.
Okay, so I think in that respect, as you say, it doesn't solve the problem. So maybe we combine it with, for example, standards. We could come up with a better solution, right? So I think what do you, so how can the establishment of standards for generative AI can help this bridge between technical development and, for example, mechanistic interpretability in these ethical and legal considerations help?
I guess
No, so for
No, but Michael can go. I'm sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you can. Michael, you can. If you want, you can.
I guess mine is more of a question. I'd be interested in hearing what sort of form those standards might take, because I am minimally experienced when it comes to the legal aspects.
Okay. So Arvid, what is your take on this?
I totally with Michael that I mean, in the end, a lot of stuff that we're trying to do, in the end it may provide how to say more information, right? Make people more informed, right? And make more informed decisions, right? And in essence that probably like bring people more agency, right? When they're interacting with these language models, right? But when we're talking about accountability, right? It's not only about the transparency part, right? That like inform people in that. It's also talking when we're talking about accountability, it's also about consequences, right? When people did something that probably like out of the norm, right? Something like that, right? And at our current state, right? From the computer science perspective alone, right? We cannot really like bring anyone like yet, right? To face the those like consequences. Hopefully, right? With these like legal instruments, right? And some of the standards in terms of traceability, for example, right? We can probably at least identify, right? Who's actually like involved in this software supply chain. And in that regard, right, there are several standards that trying to tackle that. I'm probably like going to like share a quick slide on this, if I'm allowed.
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I think you should
Okay.
be able to share. Yes.
Sure. Okay. I'll just like do this quickly. So so basically, I think we are now actually have a lot of idea, right, about what we like to achieve, right, or basically why we like to achieve that, right? We're talking about human rights standard, we're talking civil rights, political rights, consumer rights, environmental rights, right? So that's basically things that the values, right, that we like to uphold, things like that, right? So this is basically the middle layer, right, the ethical layer. I basically borrow this from you can see the reference at the bottom right. So this is Gasser and his colleagues, right? Propose this kind of like three layers, right, of like ethical AIs, right, and their like implementation, realization. So at the middle, it's something about like why or what like we like to achieve, right? These like ethical values. And there are two strands, right? Two ways that we can achieve that. Like one of the ways is these like social measures or legal instruments, right? EUA Act, it's that Natalie mentioned, is one of the legal instrument, right? That in Europe, right, in the European Union, like we like we hope that it can deliver us somehow, right, those ethical values through the legal instruments. That's another layer, like we're talking about technical layer at the bottom, right? These are like technical standards, right? And they are in the industry, right? And also like some of the government agencies try to come up with this. Also the open source community as well, right? For example, the in the US, right? We have this AI risk management framework that talk about the quality management, the risk management, the risk assessment, things like that. When it involves anything that going to maybe have some harm, right, to the public safety, to the consumer, things like that. So in a way, like this working together, because the legal instrument alone, right, cannot directly interact with the AI system, right? It's always going to be the technical layer, the technical standards, right, the software layer that interact with AI system. So one of the things, right, if you look inside the EUI Act, is that the Commission, right, the basically the EU, right, through this EUA Act, right, now require the standard bodies, right, inside the EU, right, to come up with the standards, right, with the technical standards, right. Basically, it's all the details, right, that they say that like, okay, for example, right, we talking about accountability, right, and they're actually like at least, right, in terms of the like this is actually from the political science perspective, right. Bowens and his colleagues like propose that at least, right, when we're talking about accountability, there are three purposes that why we need accountability, right? The first one is that like for the democratic value, right? We like any kind of system, right? Whether it's a computer system or bureaucratic system, right? Government system, right? To have accountability, because we want to have an informed popular control, right, over the government, over something that make a decision about our life, right? Right? Whether who that makes decision, it's a government agency, right? Or it's a computer system, right? It doesn't matter, right? Once they have a control over our life, right? We should have an informed popular control over that system, right? So this is the first purpose of the accountability. Why we need it? Why we need
Yes.
accountability, right? And in this regard, right? In terms of like in order to have people to be more informed, right, and then later taking the control, right? The technical documentation, right, in Article 11 of EUA Act is proposed, right? So if you look at the text, right? For example, right, this is something that inside the EUA Act, right? They said like these are the information, right? If you are a provider of high-risk AI system, right? Or if you are the provider of general purpose AI models, right? You should provide. This is just a partial list. They actually are like a long list, right? So for example, I can how to actually like get off this. I lost my okay. So for example, like this is the from the EU Act, right? This is like a long list, right, of information, right? If you are the provider of the general purpose AI model, like basically like this language model also a part of this, right? You should be able to demonstrate like all of this information, right, before you enter into the market, before you put your AI into a service. Anyway, if you just provide this, right? I mean, if each of provider just provide this as a paper, as a text, right? As a free text, it's going to be very difficult, right? To interoperate, to exchange information, right? Because we now actually talking about a lot of components that are going to like going to glue together, right? So there are people who try to come up with some standard, some of the way, right, to how to actually like make these AI software components, right, like easier, right, to exchange these crucial transparency obligation information, right? Software being of material, it's one of the standards, right? It's one of a kind of like technical documentation, right? That can be used for this purpose.
So I'd like to interrupt you right there. So I really like if we could back to your slide on the layers.
Sorry.
Just quickly.
Sorry. This one, right?
Yes, it's really great. I think it's, for me, it's very, very useful to when you mentioned that the AI systems cannot connect really with the regulations straight away. And what we do, what you were like showing us is say a translation, or like way to translate these regulation requirements into operationable operationable standards that computer scientists, that companies can actually use when designing the models and when disclosing it to the public. And that the values are at the middle, like supporting both operations, like ethical values and principles, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to in this direction of the values, go back to Petra for this next question, because we've talked about so models like Midjourney, models like they create, or let's say create, like generate images, to generate videos, are based on massive amounts of data, as we all know, and it brings the problem of authorship, cultural representation, appropriation. That's something we already have in the discourse of colonialism, and this is something we already have in social science, but AI brings it and makes it so much more difficult to address. And these underline some values that we deploying in the models intentionally or sometimes not intentionally. So what do you think, Petra, would be the ethical consideration that designers and developers should take into account when creating AI-generated art, especially regarding these issues that I mentioned, like authorship and cultural appropriation?
I think like a lot of my work, as I said, is focused on the cultural and value aspects rather than like regulation. So what I think like that means approaching things from like ground up, sort of. So there's a lot of research nowadays in HCI. Some of my colleagues are working on it. Felt ethics, for example, and like cultivating sort of like empathy and sensitivity towards the stakeholders. Like, for example, the artists whose perhaps art might be used in it. I think like a lot of these situations are resulting from sort of like value tensions, but also like tensions in priorities. So if we think of companies and developers when they are creating these models, there might be that there are like capitalist interests to create profits, and then there is some disregard of the data that is put into the systems. For example, like we know that a lot of companies have been just mining that data without thinking about like whose artwork is it and what are we sort of like, do we have the right to put it in here? So I think like as like individual actors, the designers and developers can definitely cultivate that kind of sensitivity, empathy, and sort of like felt ethics aspects towards the stakeholders that have a stake in developing those models.
And regarding the values, so they're like we talk about transparency, trustworthiness, we talk about respect, we talk about, so there's something you would prioritize as a value?
So how I'm usually like talking about it is that it's a design political negotiation. So for example, the model that Arthit was showing here is like, I see it as a model or a vehicle of enforcing certain types of values and like culture, sort of. So if you're sort of using post-structuralist approach in your research, coming from social sciences, and you take the assumption, for example, that knowledge is socially constructed and it's not like absolute, then I think the interesting question is like the process of defining those values, and then what happens after that when we sort of like spread it through that model. So I'm interested in that route, like what kind of values do we sort of like decide to prioritize, and what might be left out or included there, because we know that historically, right, that we are doing that all the time, that we choose predominant values, like in these kind of models that we are now talking about, maybe European Union, the regulation, we are enforcing then certain types of European values, but how could that look like in some other cultural context? In Africa or in Southeast Asia or so. So I think those are interesting questions to think about, and not take it as like assumption that the values that we are enforcing are always right, So sort of kind of like being agnostic about the knowledge and culture that they're stemming from.
That's a really interesting point. In my research, I've been dealing with relationality in AI, and I come from Colombia, so I also have like a different perspective of how those values differ from the values we are usually used to in this part of the world. It is very interesting because one question is from the social science perspective, or the humanities perspective, is we have these values that kind of drive or help us drive our regulations or policies, but also when a computer scientist is developing a model, they also have their own values that also are reflected into the model. So Michael, do you, as a computer scientist and from your perspective, how does this topic of values come into play in your work when programming a model, for example?
So I definitely agree that there's a significant sort of relationship between the values that a software engineer or the designer of an AI system has, and the sorts of data that you choose, and the sort of context for which you're building the model. But I think this sort of goes back to the fundamental problem of we don't know what values these systems have when we build them. We train them on a lot of human text. This text comes from a variety of sources, and it is like predominantly like English text, just because that's the majority of what's easily accessible on the internet. But we don't have any idea what the values inside these models are, right? Like, if you talk to ChatGPT, it has like a pretty like standard, I guess, like Western, sort of like moral disposition to it when it comes to like most ethical questions. But if you look at actual pre-trained models before we attempt to do like reinforcement learning through human feedback on them, they will express all kinds of values. And even when you take models that have been, we've attempted to align them, something like Bing Chat, or I think Microsoft Copilot is what they've changed the name to. These models are just like absolutely insane and talk about wanting to kill humans at like the drop of a hat. So I definitely agree that there is a role that the software engineer and that the developers of the AI system play here, but most of the time, like we genuinely have like no idea what the values that we're building into these models are. And I agree that we need to think carefully about where these values are coming from and whether they actually represent like the whole scope of human cultures and the whole scope of human experiences. But I think it's really difficult to talk about that when we actually don't know what's in the models. And sort of going back to what Arthur was saying, I think it's good to have sort of like, legal frameworks on what AI models should be used for and what they can do. But I think point like 1A in one of those in the PDF that you shared was a description of like what the language model can do and what its intended purposes are. And this is basically impossible with current AI systems, because when we train the model, we have no idea what its capabilities are. This is like a whole area of research in AI alignment, is just better evaluations of model capabilities and what they can actually do and what their limitations are and under what kind of conditions they fail. So I guess the main point I would want to make is like, I think there's sort of a disconnect between the social sciences and the technical sciences in terms of like what's actually possible. We don't know how to evaluate these models. We have no idea what their capabilities are, and we don't know even like where their values are coming from. And we also don't know what the capabilities of these models are going to, be in like, just a couple of years. Because of scaling laws, there's sort of no reason to believe that we're going to see the capabilities of these models plateau. And when I say capabilities, I don't mean like a good way. I just mean their ability to do kind of any tasks that we can define arbitrarily well. And I think most of the tasks that people are going to try to define for these systems are probably a net negative for humanity, like, better recommendation systems for social media to make people addicted, or better censorship algorithms, or better surveillance algorithms. So.
Okay, so I think one point that has been permeating the conversation is this gap between computer science and humanities or social sciences. And at the end, this is maybe also a gap between the interests of companies of deploying models that make money, that is business, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing. We are a market society, capitalism, how you want to take it, but companies have a right on making business in some degree with some regulations. And between this gap between them and between regulators and between social scientists trying to protect the rights or protect the interests of individuals or groups or minorities, and we see this, like there's a gap there that's very clear. And this kind of comes into or combines with the rapid advancement of AI, and it's really hard to keep up, especially ethical and legal wise. So in this sense, considering this rapid case, Natalia. What is your take on, or your opinion on how can regulatory frameworks adapt to promote innovation while safeguarding against potential ethical and legal risks associated with this deployment?
I mean, I think this is a very difficult question, but actually my own research and what I would say, quite a big supporter of, it's this kind of, I would say, soft law mechanisms, in the sense that sometimes they are more flexible than concrete articles. Like, for example, the example that Arhit showed, I think it's very good when you have this, you need to provide this and this and this and this information. And then, as Michael said, some of this information, it's, let's say, from a technical point of view, impossible to provide. So in the end, we have, I would say, a reconcilable gap here between the regulation and the state of the art. But there are some, I would say, tools, and I'm thinking here about conformity assessments, which are included in the AI Act, impact assessments in general, human rights impact assessments, data protection impact assessments, different accountability impact assessments, different kind of those. Technical standards, I quite a huge fan of. I think they could end up helping a lot precisely in solving these gaps. So when regulators demand that a certain technology needs to require with some requirement, if those requirements can be codified into technical standards, if it's feasible, then I would say this could be a very good tool to be considered. Risk assessments also, or regulatory sandboxes. I think these kind of instruments are the key to keep up with the technology without sacrificing regulation, because regulation, we have seen it with the AI Act. The first proposal, if I'm not mistaken, it was from 2021, and we still do not have a past regulation, let's say. So if we let's say, go out with this regulatory rhythm, probably we are going to have a huge problem. But these kind of instruments that are very flexible, that are very case by case, that are very also, that they can also be used by both engineers, but also policymakers, regulators, people with a more legal, ethical profile. I would say, from my point of view, this would be the key to try to keep up without sacrificing, for example, fundamental rights.
Okay, I think that's a very interesting point, and it connects with what Arthur just wrote in the chat about self-declaration. So Arthur, would you like to go a little bit deeper into what you mean by self-declaration? And I would like to, as a second question, I would like to hear your opinion on what are the difference between the standards, for example, that you observe in your homeland Thailand, or in Southeast Asia in general, and the standards the standards we have in the EU, the US, because that's as Petra was saying, that these perspectives that come from different cultures can also perhaps not, like, surely help us address human issues that we have, because the problems that the global South has are not the same problems the global North has. Like, if you want to divide it in a different way, countries, or like this standard, should be adapted to the necessities or the concerns of countries specifically. I'm not a big fan. I mean, universality of regulations is important, but we also have to contextualize regulations and standards. So I would like to have this last question for you.
Thank you. That's a very big question. I think, like, one of the things that we can see, like, I mean, going back to that self-declaration, right? I think that's probably an approach that, for example, like Singapore, right, like to go as well. Like, so here in Europe, right, in the EU, I think it's, how to say, I think it's very difficult to replicate the EU system elsewhere, right? For example, like when we're talking about EU Act, right? It doesn't appear out of the vacuum, right? It's actually I mean, if you actually look at the name of the regulation itself, right? It's actually the harmonization right, of the existing laws, right? So actually a lot of if you actually like look at towards the last section of the EUA Act, right? There are actually a lot of amendments of the existing laws, right? Like those like medical devices, there are like something about like toys, there are something about like there's a lot of stuff, right? And all of this regulation at the EU level, right, also has the like at the base level that Charter of Fundamental Rights, right? This is something that like got accepted across the member states, right? So this supranational infrastructure that is enforceable doesn't exist elsewhere, right? If you're talking about like something that like can be enforced across the border, right? Because I think like one of the complications here, right, when we're talking about the enforcement of the law like, relating to like anything internet, right? It's like the provider can be in one country, and then the user, deployer, and whoever like in the supply chain can be in like different other countries, right? Southeast Asia, for example, right? When you mentioned, right, like that's my region, right? Like come from Thailand. It's around like 10 countries, right? We don't have that mechanism, right? And a lot of companies actually registered in Singapore, right? Those like they're kind of like a big regional hub, right? For like those like headquarters, like Facebook, Microsoft, whoever, right? If they like to do business in that region, most of the time they have headquarters in Singapore. But the law in Singapore doesn't apply in Indonesia, in Cambodia, in anywhere else, right? And we don't have such a like human rights or a strong civil rights protection, right? So I don't think like if you just throw this like exact copy of EUA Act alone, right, to any region, you can enforce that. So I think that's one of the thing, right? And I think also in terms of the pressure, economic pressure as well, right? A lot of time when people in that region, right, in Southeast Asia, also in China, in a lot of places, including the US as well, right? They say that okay, we cannot regulate that much because we like our businesses to be able to compete with other countries, right? If we regulate too much, we cannot compete with China. We not compete with whoever, right? So that's a narrative in Southeast Asia at the moment, right? So the way they propose at the moment, it's going to be more of, okay, we're going to regulate. We're not going to use the hard law, right? We just open it as a voluntarily kind of like a basis, right? But the government will support, right? For example, in the case of Singapore, right, they come up with this so-called AI Verify Foundation, right? So this is something that like, okay, we know that our companies, right, from whoever, right, also like to export the products outside and sell it in the EU and in the US as well. So we're going to come up with something like a certification program to say that like, okay, this is safe for outside, for export.
Yeah.
Right, for the target country. But inside our own country, maybe this safety, it's not that, well, say like that matter enough.
Not so important. And I think that's connects with this is maybe one of the aspects of colonialism, is that you have to comply with these external policies to be able to export a product, the model or something, while the interest and the necessities and the requirements of your population are not even considered. So we're like always taking the standards of the EU or the standards of the US as the golden standards without considering what other country with their own systems or their own way of resolving problems have to
Like
teach.
For example, take the food safety standard, let's say, right? The food safety standard. The higher standard how to say, like canned fish, for example, right, would we export to here in the EU, right? But a little bit lower standard canned fish will just sell in Thailand, right, from the same factory. I think maybe the AI regulation can be in that kind of stuff as well. Yes, we're going to embrace EU standard if we like to export something here.
Okay, that's a very interesting take. So I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. So I would just like to pop like one last lightning question, so 10-20 seconds, just to wrap up. Okay, so like let's start with Michael's question before doing that. So he says a lot of these proposals for regulation rely on being able to evaluate. Or do you want to pop the question, Michael? Maybe it's better if you just do it out loud.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So a lot of the proposals for regulation sort of rely on being able to actually evaluate a model and its capabilities. Like I mentioned, our current evaluation techniques are not really capable of evaluating current models, and they're probably going to continue to fall behind as we build, if we continue to build larger and larger language models. What happens under these regulatory frameworks where, you know, by some regulatory process, we sort of give a model some kind of like stamp of approval of like, okay, it's safe to use in these contexts. And then later on, as we sort of explore the model, we've learned that it has, you know, dangerous capabilities or behaves in an unsafe manner. What happens under existing regulatory frameworks when that happens?
Who wants to address this question? Natalia, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, something I can say, I think it's key for the legal assessment of AI tools in general, is that it needs to be kind of cyclic and not static. That's one of the reasons why in my research I focus on the principle of proportionality, which is a case-by-case tool that also is resistant to what is called the test of time. So maybe a technology is necessary today, but tomorrow, because we have other technologies, we have different societal structures, whatever, it is not necessary. So I think what should happen with this kind of evaluations, standard certification, whatever, particularly when we are talking with AI, is that decisions should never be final. So they should be in certain time frames, they should be revised, because otherwise the risks that you mentioned are, I mean, it's very feasible that they happen.
Okay, and now I'm gonna pop up my lightning question. So 10-15 seconds. How can interdisciplinary collaboration between humanities, social sciences, and computer science can enhance our understanding of the ethical implications of generative AI? Let's start with Petra.
So when I read this question, when you sent it to me before, I was also like thinking that the question sounds a bit loaded, because we are talking about social and computer scientists here, but what about, for example, the art researchers? So like my question as an answer to this question is like, also, are there some other groups of people that should be involved here that we are not doing as a default? And in regards to the question of these two, I feel like I'm working a lot in this in-between area. So I talk a lot with the computer scientists, but also the social scientists. And it brings a lot of difficulties, especially like the language that people are using and like the epistemologies and ontologies that their sort of like thinking is coming from. So I think we need to establish sort of more dialogue and settings where people can actually learn to understand how people coming from different kinds of like cultural and knowledge backgrounds are thinking, and also like bringing that sensitivity towards other points of view, which I was talking about earlier as well.
Okay. Natalia?
Well, I will try to be very brief. I would say, first of all, as we already mentioned, not ask from a legal, ethical point of view, not ask for technical impossible things would be a very good starting point. Then I would say, like kind of going on the other hands, policymakers, regulators, etc., should be aware, at least at a certain minimum, of the state of the art. It doesn't make any sense that you say we are regulating AI systems are algorithms, full stop. We have a problem there. And the last point I would mention is that every time that I found, either in a paper or as a regulatory proposal, something that I really liked, that I really found it touched all, would say, implications, it was always made by an interdisciplinary team. So I would say interdisciplinarity is always a success, and the lack of interdisciplinarity might have some failures.
Arpit?
The question of evaluation really struck me, and I think that's maybe something that very important, that the interdisciplinary can really help, right? If we can bring people from all sorts of backgrounds, right, and perspective and different value as well, right? What about having those questions, right, that arose, right, from these people, and make an different evaluation set, right, from those from this collaboration, right? Because I think like currently a lot of evaluation on LLM, right, it's actually based on existing test, right? Whether it's like a high school test, it's a test, a medical one, or whatever, like the existing basically paper-based test, like which probably like attend towards a little bit like to like academia, right? But if we can actually come up with the questions, right, for the evaluation of this LLM, right, to test their values, right, in different contexts, maybe that will help us a little bit forward the better evaluation. Thanks.
Okay, and last but not least, Michael.
I want to say I agree with Arhit's point, and I think most of the other points made in this. Thank you so much for putting this panel together. If I can make like, I guess like two quick comments. I know we talked about like climate impacts of like large models running in these big data centers, but there's also like models that people can just run on their like own machines. Like you can run an image generation model or even like a simple language model just like on your laptop, which is not really like detectable through any like regulatory framework, right? So how do open source models that people can run on their own hardware fit into this regulatory framework when people use those models for harm? And I guess my other point would be, you know, sometimes from a regulatory perspective or from an ethical perspective, we're gonna want things from models that are like impossible. We're gonna want assurances of safety that we cannot technically provide. And I don't think that means that we should give up on wanting those things from those models. It's not clear to me what that means from like a regulatory perspective of what this means about like developing AI systems, but I think we should prioritize like the human needs over, you know, creation of more powerful models when those two things are irreconcilable.
Yeah, I think as a just a quick comment to that, I've heard from a friend of mine who also works in the legal aspect from transparency, that ethics should be a perspective look in the problems we have, while legal should take a backwards look, right? So legal learns from what had already happened, and ethics helps with the perspective look. So I think, as you say, giving up is not a great idea. We should always have standards. We should have think really through what things ought to be normatively, and then this can help the regulation to catch up as fast as possible, because so otherwise we will be always falling behind too much, and then in these gaps of falling behind, lots of harm can be done, and that's what we want to prevent. Yeah, okay, so I think we are at the end of the panel. Thank you so much to our 4 panelists for joining us, for sharing your expertise, for your input. I learned a lot, and I hope you also got something out of the panel. I hope we can keep in touch, and it will be delightful to organize another panel soon, also gathering people from different perspectives. So yes, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the people that joined today throughout the meeting. I hope you also enjoyed it a lot. And I wish you all good day, good evening, good afternoon, and